we'll go ahead and get started. The number of new ads is slowing, though I'm sure some people will trickle in. Thanks everyone for joining us today, or if you're watching this recording in the future, thanks for watching the recording in the future. We are excited to be digging into the newest CMMI ACO model, the LEAD model. For those of you who don't know, I'm Maria Alexander. I'm a partner and executive VP with Coral Health Advisors. We provide professional services consulting to organizations trying to do the good work of value-based care. And I am joined today by Joy Chen, who is a director on our team. Joy brings extensive experience in value-based payment arrangements, particularly as it relates to primary care and long-term care. Prior to her role at Coral, she was the co-lead for the ACO REACH model at CMS, where she managed ACO participation and implemented policy changes related to the model's financial and quality methodologies. And Nathan Jacobson is a senior consulting actuary with Milliman. We're really grateful he was able to join us today. And he has extensive experience working directly with providers, participating in alternative payment models and value-based care arrangements. Nathan works closely with ACOs across MSSP, REACH, Medicaid, and other lines of business to project and monitor financial performance, identify opportunities, and model the impact of changes to programs, or in this case, modeling new programs. So really excited about the expertise that both Joy and Nathan are bringing to our conversation today, and hope that you find this useful. We have some information. Joy will walk us through the agenda and some goals in a moment and get us into the content, but we want this to be interactive. So I think it's okay to say, feel free to put questions or comments in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll also have time for that at the end. So please jump in if something we're saying, is you'd like to hear more about, or you have a question about it. Joy, I will turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Maria. Andrew, if you do a couple slides, maybe slide 3. Perfect. Thank you all so much for joining today. Before we get into the substance, I wanted to take a moment to frame really what we're trying to accomplish in the next hour or so. I think our goal today is practical. We're not here to reread the RFA to you. And frankly, I think some of you probably have it memorized already. But really what we want to do is to help you understand what LEAD actually means for how you'll run your ACO day to day, the infrastructure you'll need, how the financial mechanics work, and what go live readiness genuinely looks like heading into January 1st, 2027. So with that, I think we can get started with a quick grounding in the model itself. Next slide. Understand that there's probably varying understandings of, in our audience of models and MSSP and REACH. So really just wanted to provide a foundation on the LEAD basics, because I think there are some important nuances here worth pausing on, whether you are new to VBC or you've been in ACO REACH or in MSSP. So LEAD, as we all know, is a 10-year voluntary model running from January 27 through December 2036. And it's the designated successor to ACO REACH. So if you're currently in REACH, this could potentially be your next home. There are 2 main risk options. Global risk gives you 100% of shared savings, but also puts you on the hook for 100% of losses. Professional risk is the more conservative path, 50% of savings and then 50% of losses. So you'll have a symmetry there. We'll talk more about how to think through that decision, but know upfront that it has real benchmark implications. You can have participant providers who join at the TIN level and preferred providers who typically may be specialists, but doesn't have to be. Those can be added at the TIN and PI level. You're going to notice that CMS introduced 2 spending designations, and these have implications on the benchmark as well. If your ACO is a higher spending ACO, that means you're above your region's risk-adjusted Medicare spend, which sounds like a bad thing, but it actually means you have more opportunity to demonstrate savings. Lower spending ACOs are historically efficient, which is great, but it also means that your savings runway is narrower and you have to work a bit harder to get those savings, right? But there are going to be adjustments that CMS has made to the model so that you're not trying to beat your historical record each time. I think what we're really seeing here is that LEAD draws the best of both MSSP and ACO REACH while also testing some genuinely new approaches. And it's worth understanding it on its own terms rather than assuming it works, just like whichever model you're coming from, if you're in either REACH or MSSP. Next slide. So let's talk about how ACOs will be designated based on your TIN lists. You can either be entering as a newly entering ACO or renewing. And the distinctions between them are pretty consequential. So we want to make sure that everyone is clear on where they may land. A newly entering ACO has to meet all three criteria. So it's not an either or, it's an and for all three of these. Your legal entity that you're applying with has previously not participated in a Medicare ACO. Fewer than 40% of your participant TINs have participated in a Medicare ACO in the past 5 years, and fewer than 50% of your participant providers did the same. If you don't meet all three of those, you're considered a renewing ACO. Now, why does this matter? A few reasons. First, beneficiary minimums are different. Newly entering ACOs need at least 1,000 aligned beneficiaries in your first performance year, and then 600 claims-based alignment in at least one of the base years, which is 2024 through 2026. Renewing ACOs face a higher bar, which makes sense, right? That 5,000 in your first performance year and 3,000 with the claims-based alignment history. There are a few differences with those that are eligible for the high needs track as well. Now, risk track flexibility also differs. Newly entering ACOs can start at either global or professional risk and have the option to switch from global to professional after performance year 1. Renewing ACOs can also choose between global or professional risk, but once you're in global risk, you can't switch out. So if you're renewing ACO and you choose professional risk, you also have to remain in that for 4 years before switching to global. These are meaningful constraints. So if you're renewing ACO, evaluating your risk elections, you need to be thoughtful about it from the start. Third, benchmark weighting also works differently. Newly entering ACOs have differing weights, 10, 30, and 60% across the 3 benchmark years, with more weight to recent experience, while renewing ACOs get equal weighting at 33% for each year. What we can really see here is LEAD is offering more flexibility and runway for new entrants, and that's really deliberate to bring new organizations into the value-based care ecosystem. If you're a new entrant, take advantage of it. But if you're renewing, you may want to plan accordingly. Next slide. So transitioning now to really one of the important parts, which is your participation options. I'm going to pass it to Nathan, and he will walk you through some implications.
Thanks, Joy. So as she mentioned on the previous slide, each ACO, as you're electing, must elect for either the global risk option or the professional risk option. I'll run through what the implications of each of these are. If you're coming from REACH, if you're already in REACH, these are going to sound pretty familiar, although there are some nuances with LEAD as compared to REACH. For MSSPs, it's going to be a pretty different structure. So under global risk, you have 100% of your upside shared, and you have 100% downside risk too. So 100% up, 100% down. Professional risk, 50% up, 50% down. These are pretty much these are exactly the same parameters as was in REACH. If you're coming from MSSP, the point to compare against is maybe the enhanced track, which is 75% up and 40% down. So in MSSP, asymmetric or risk sharing rates. In REACH and in LEAD, they're symmetric. As Joy mentioned, renewing ACOs, if anybody picks global, sorry, let me get this right. Newly entering ACOs may switch to professional risk after the first performance year, but renewing ACOs are stuck in global risk if they pick it. On the other hand, professional risk, anybody who picks that, you must stay in that for 4 years before switching to global. So like Joy said, you want to be really thoughtful about which one is appropriate for you, especially if you're in a renewing ACO, since you have very limited opportunities to switch. Under the global risk option, there is a capitation called total care capitation that you may choose. You're not forced to choose it, but you will receive as a capitation all of the claims paid within your ACO. So all claims are set, payments are set equal to zero, and you get a capitation for all of them instead, that you can then choose how that gets paid out among your providers. Both global and professional have the primary care capitation, which is required, and that is the same concept, but only applied to your primary care claims. So all the claims will be paid fee for service as usual. One thing that, again, those of you coming from Reach will be familiar with is the benchmark discount that applies under the global risk track. Because ACOs can earn 100% of their savings, CMMI wants to build in some way to actually generate savings for Medicare under the global track. And the way to do that is to apply a discount to the benchmark rate. This means you have a greater hurdle to clear if you want to produce savings, and you're also more likely to pay out losses. Under global, if you're a lower spending ACO, then you have a 3% discount. If you're a higher spending ACO, it's a 1.75% discount in performance year one, and that will increase up to that 3% over time. On the other hand, the professional track has no discount applied. The regional adjustment that's available to lower spending ACOs is only available under the global risk track. That's really important to note because that is the difference between both REACH and MSSP. I'll talk about the implications of that a little bit further on, but just know that if your ACO, if you're coming from REACH or MSSP, and you had a really strong regional adjustment there, that is only still available if you select the global track. And that global track, of course, comes along with that discount. The last item to note is that CMS has effectively a risk-adjusted episode model that they will administer that you can use to set, say, payments out to affiliated specialists called CARA. Only the global risk option is eligible to participate in that. So if that's of interest to you, you have to select the global risk option. So the selections really matter here, particularly because they're going to impact your benchmark. You pick global, you have to be able to overcome that benchmark discount to really produce savings for your organization. All right, we can move on to the next slide. So I'm going to give an overview here of the benchmark methodology. For those of you in MSSP, this is going to sound familiar with a few nuances. For those of you in REACH, this is going to sound very different. Performance year 1 through 5, by the way, is where this methodology applies. In the second half of the model, so PY6 onwards, a regional rate book will replace this process. We don't have full information on what that looks like. It's possible it looks similar to REACH methodology, but at the moment they haven't released any details. The first step is to set a historical baseline for your ACO spending. They look at the 3 years prior to your ACO's entry into LEAD. So for everyone participating in performance year 1, which is 2027, that'd be 24, 25, 26. If you choose to join the model later on in the cycle, then, say performance year 2, which is 2028, you would instead have 25, 26, 27. Those 3 years will be fixed for the entirety of the model. So if you join in performance year 1, 24, 25, 26, those are your benchmark years for the entire course of the model. Newly entering ACOs get a weight of 10% on benchmark year 1, 30% on benchmark year 2, 60% on benchmark year 3. So really putting a lot of weight on that third benchmark year versus renewing ACOs getting equal weight on all 3 benchmark years. So each of them matter equally when saying that historical benchmark. Then they apply benchmark adjustments. The first adjustment is the regional efficiency adjustment, which again, only available to lower spending ACOs in the global risk track. Or if your ACO previously participated in REACH or MSSP, you could get a prior savings adjustment instead. It's one or the other, you can't get both. You get whichever one is greater. Additionally, if you're a higher spending ACO, there's a 1.5% add-on capitation. This isn't really an adjustment to the benchmark because it doesn't come out of your expenditures or anything. It's just essentially free money. They pay you 1.5% of your benchmark. There's a cap on the benchmark adjustment. That's a percent of nationwide USPCC, which is risk adjusted to your particular ACO. That cap is 3%. If you're a lower spending ACO coming from MSSP, not REACH, that cap only applies to MSSP. And for anyone else, it's a 5% cap. Next up is the update factor. So all of that is historical. Now we're trying to forward to the performance year. There will be a national regional blend that gets 2/3 of the weight of your trend. That national regional blend is based on actual expenditures in the year. So they'll go back and look at historically for the performance year, what the expenditures were in your region and in the nation. You get more of a weight on your national expenditures, the greater market share you have in your region. Then there's a 1/3 weight on the accountable care prospective trend. So this is a prospectively set trend. It's known in advance. They don't modify it based on what happens during the performance year. There are guardrails on the ACPT. So the ACPT was first introduced in MSSP, as if any of you participated in MSSP in 24-25, that was kind of a difficult situation because the ACPT really brought down your trends. They're putting guardrails where essentially they will not allow the ACPT to move the overall trend by more than a few tenths of a percent in performance year one, but those guardrails widen over time. Once that your benchmark's been trend to the performance year, they apply risk adjustment. So there's separate models for risk adjustment by enrollment type. The 3 types are age disabled, ESRD, and the new high needs population. Age disabled population will be based on the CMS HCC model, but with a twist. They're removing the high needs population, recalibrating the model. So it won't look like the coefficients will not be the same as the standard CMS HCC model. The ESRD model will be the same. For the high needs population, there will be a concurrent model. They are redoing the REACH model for the new lead high needs population, but it'll be a concurrent based model, not a prospective model like the CMS HCC model. There'll be a cap on the amount of the risk score growth that you can recognize. So 3% for age disabled and ESRD, high needs is TBD. Long term, they're planning to transition to AI inferred risk scores. We don't quite know what that's going to look like yet. The idea there would be to require less effort in identifying and capturing conditions that maybe are, obvious from the underlying data. Again, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. Then finally, the discounts and withholds. So like I mentioned before, the global risk discount, 1.75% if you're high spend, 3% if you're low spend. If you exit in the first performance year, there's a withhold of 2%. And then finally, there's a 3% quality withhold that you earn back through your quality score. Again, this functions very similarly in REACH. For those of you in MSSP or completely new, this functions as a discount to your benchmark, and it can be meaningful. The average quality score that we were seeing in REACH was somewhere around a 75%. So if you achieve that 75%, you're not earning back 0.75% of your benchmark. You're losing that, so it functions as a discount there. Can we go to the next slide? So a few pitfalls to avoid that you want to be thinking about as you're considering lead. On the capitation of financial risk, one thing to note about PCC and TCC, those capitations that you receive, they're a percent of your performance year benchmark. They're based on historical spending, but then they're a percentage of current year benchmark. If your risk scores go down, so does your capitation. If you're getting a global discount, you're getting quality withhold. In REACH, at least, both of those would result in a decrease to your capitation. So just be aware if you're relying on that capitation, it can be meaningfully lower than you would expect because of these discounts. On the financial risk side, the global track offers 100% upside, very tempting, but you have to contend with that discount. If you imagine that discount wasn't there and try to compare against professional, right, you would need a 3.5% to a 6% gross savings to overcome that discount and be better off under the global track. A few potential benchmarking traps. I'll mention it again, professional does not offer regional adjustment. So this is different from both REACH and MSSP. If you're a lower spending ACO and you elect the professional track, the only way to produce savings is to beat the trend, or if you've got a prior savings adjustment that you can rely on. You can't, unlike MSSP and REACH, where if you were lower spending, you can't just stay at the nationwide trend and continue to produce savings through the regional adjustment. You do have to be beating that trend or have that prior savings adjustment. If you're an MSSP, there's a meaningful benchmark discount from quality that I just mentioned. So you have to, for MSSP, it was a gate, or it was really just a discount to the savings rate. Now it's actually hitting your benchmark, and getting 100% quality score is not a guarantee. The high spending status is a cliff. You're either high spending or low spending. If you're low spending, you lose a lot of some of those features of the high spending. So you want to be very careful about your ACO composition. And one note here is we don't know how the prior savings adjustment is going to work. If an ACO merges or splits, they have specified that in the RFA. And then listing out some of the key differences to keep in mind in MSSP and REACH. There's a high needs population segment that didn't exist in MSSP, and REACH is entirely separate type of ACO as opposed to one of the populations. Custom risk score models, as I mentioned before, that's something that is different. You will not be able to rely directly on the risk scores that you know for your beneficiaries in any programs you're currently in. It's going to be different. It's going to be different than the CMS standard models too. I'll mention it one more time, no regional adjustment under the professional track. And the treatment of high spending ACOs is very different from MSSP and REACH, where there's some pretty good benefits if you are a high spending ACO. Some differences specific to MSSP. I'll mention again, the quality score actually impacts your benchmark, and it's not just a modifier to your savings rate. And for attribution, there's no physician visit requirement to get attributed to an ACO. Under MSSP, they have to see a physician with the ACO to get attributed. That's not the case under LEAD. So just be aware you might get more members and they might look different than what you would have received under MSSP. REACH, one of the big differences is your participant list. Your providers who drive attribution cannot be split by NPI. So you have to put an entire TIN in or out. So there's no ability to carve out NPIs who wouldn't perform well under LEAD. The trending methodology is also very different. It's much closer to what was done in MSSP. So just be aware of that if you're coming from REACH. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it back to Joy to talk about beneficiary alignment.
Thanks, Nathan. Next slide, Andrew. So LEAD offers two alignment options. Prospective alignment, where claims-based and voluntary alignment are conducted prior to each performance year. In this option, no mid-year updates are allowed. And this will likely sound familiar from MSSP and REACH. Hybrid alignment, on the other hand, is new, and it allows voluntary alignment updates throughout the performance year, monthly, that's updated to your attribution monthly, and then claims-based alignment will get one mid-year update when you add any new TINs. Now, this is a pretty meaningful change if you're planning to grow your participant list during the performance year. Something to note, though, the hybrid option allows ACOs to grow the participant lists mid-year, but only for beneficiaries who haven't been attributed to another Medicare ACO can be aligned. In other words, ACOs cannot move beneficiaries mid-year that are already attributed to another LEAD ACO or MSSP ACO, or really any other model that has a direct overlap that is not allowed with LEAD. The alignment methodology itself is a two-stage process. So if a beneficiary gets about more than 10% of their primary care evaluation and management services from PCPs, alignment is based solely on those providers. However, if they're below that threshold, certain specialists, such as cardiologists, nephrologists, and others, can also drive alignment. Here's some practical implications we want you to think about, though. Full TIN participation combined with this specialist-driven alignment pathway is likely to produce more attribution from specialists than most MSSP or REACH ACOs are used to seeing. And that could be a good thing, right? More lives, more savings opportunities. But it also means your care management model needs to be ready, especially if you're treating a more complex, higher acuity population. Next slide. So as Nathan has mentioned, in quality is factored directly into the benchmark, and rather than serving as a gate or multiplier on your sharing rate. But what that means practically is that lower quality scores raise the hurdle you need to clear to generate savings. And in a bad scenario, they can push you toward losses. It means quality can't be treated as a compliance checkbox. It really needs to be a genuine operational priority for ACOs. The quality measure set under LEAD includes 4 claims-based measures you may recognize from REACH. You have readmissions, unplanned admissions for patients with multiple chronic conditions, days at home, and timely follow-ups after acute exacerbations. There's also CAPS, which will be familiar to folks, and 2 new electronic clinical quality measures, diabetes control and controlling high blood pressure. These may look familiar from MSSP. The ECQMs are optional for reporting in performance years 1 and 2, but they are paid for reporting in performance years 3 and 4, and they'll begin to be paid for performance starting in year 5 and above. So there's a runway here to build your infrastructure, but it's worth starting now to prepare. One design feature that's worth highlighting is that LEAD uses a graduated multiplier known as the Continuous Improvement and Sustained Excellence Performer designation, also known as CI-SEP. And this really rewards incremental improvements in quality. This makes quality performance more predictable and rewards ACOs that are on an upward trajectory, even if they're not yet at the top of the distribution. The quality withhold in LEAD is 3%, as we mentioned, compared to 5% in ACO REACH. So the holdback is smaller, but the stakes are no less real given how directly quality ties to your benchmark. Notice how we're repeating some things throughout this presentation because we really want to drive it home and make sure that you all are prepared. And nothing is going to come as a surprise, maybe besides what CMS announces year to year.
On that point, Joy, I was just going to add in, there's a little note in the RFA around the ECQMs being limited to Medicare patients. And there's not a lot that's said about that, but that's just wanted to flag that as something we're watching for when additional specifications that come out for organizations that are in MSSP or have looked at MSSP before. You'll be aware that ECQMs are typically all payer, all patient, not limited to Medicare fee for service. And I know I'm certainly curious to see, like, do they really mean that? How does that work? How does that work functionally? And just sort of what does that mean about how CMS is thinking about quality measurement in ACO programs more generally? So more to come on that, hopefully, from CMS in the future.
Next slide. So with all of that as context, I think we can shift our mindsets from how does LEAD work to what do I actually need to do to be ready? Next slide. When we work with organizations preparing for a new ACO program, and this really shouldn't come as a surprise, that staffing and infrastructure questions almost always surface as the most underestimated challenge. The technology decisions get a lot of attention, and they matter, of course, but it's the human infrastructure, the care management team, your data analysts, your operational leads that tend to be the real bottleneck. So let's think through some of the core components you need to have in place. Care management is where most ACOs start, and justifiably so. You need a care management model that is scaled to your attributed population, with particular attention to your high needs beneficiaries, both because they drive a disproportionate share of cost and because LEAD has a specific high needs population designation with its own risk score model. So whether you're building your care model in-house or you're working with a vendor partner, the capacity and workflows need to be defined and tested before go live. Along with, what we talk about technology, certified electronic health record technology compliance really is a non-negotiable for CMS. They've rolled that out and offered some flexibilities here. CMS is offering a 1-year runway for participant TINs that are not yet compliant with CERT, but it's important to assess and prepare your participant networks now to address gaps. Because really this is something that is solvable, right? Additionally, capitation infrastructure is the piece that catches a lot of organizations off guard. So if you're considering or electing a capitation option, whether that's total care capitation or primary care capitation, along with some of those additional options that you have with APO and NPCC, you need to make sure your contracting, billing, and reconciliation processes can support that payment flow. Because this isn't just a technology question, it's an operational and financial one. And it's something that's particularly important when you're maintaining your relationships with your participant TINs. No one likes late payments, and especially not providers. Finally, data infrastructure, which is really your ability to aggregate claims, monitor performance, and generate actionable insights for your care teams is really important. LEAD introduces some new complexity, right, around these attribution methodology changes, the high needs population split that may require updates to your existing analytics setup. I think really the takeaway that we want here around your around operations is that you should assess where you are today against each of these dimensions. Really identify your gaps and build a realistic work plan with enough lead time. And if you're not sure where to start, that assessment process is something that Coral is happy to help with. Coral and Milliman. And I will flip it back to Nathan for our next slide.
Thanks, Joy. So what I want to talk about here is about financial projections and how to think about building these out for your ACO. The first thing to note is that there's two times when you really, plenty of times when you want to think about projections, but kind of bucket them into two. One of them is when you're thinking of entering lead. Who of my providers look good in lead? Should everyone be in? Should we split between lead and another program? Should we stay out of lead altogether, right? So looking forward. Another perspective is, okay, I'm in the program. How am I looking? How am I going to perform by the end of the year? Now, from that first perspective, I want to talk through a few things to consider. And number one is that lead performance is going to look very different from MSSP or REACH. There's a lot of new elements in lead that really can change the dynamics of who's performing well and who isn't. The big one, top of the list, high needs population. That's been split out from the age disabled and ESRD populations. High needs historically tends to have a very high risk adjusted cost. So even when you account for their high risk scores, usually their costs are above that. When they get removed from the regional population that's used to set the regional adjustment, patients who are not high needs are no longer being compared to a population including the high needs population. That could reduce regional efficiency, make the ACO look worse compared to the region. So that could really change the dynamics of who's low spending versus high spending. The alignment methodology isn't going to look like MSSP or REACH. It's a little bit of both. You have no physician visit requirement, but other than that, the mechanism looks a lot more like MSSP than prospective MSSP than REACH. REACH, you could split your TINs out to an MPI level. You can't do that under LEAD, so participation will look very different, or your attributed population might look different because of that. Risk score models are going to be different. They are those custom models that we don't even know what the coefficients look like yet. If you're in REACH, the benchmark setting and trending is looking a lot more like MSSP than it did REACH. And the lower spending versus high spending benchmark implications, that split is very different. And it's based on that cliff of whether your regional efficiency is above a 1.0 or below. Putting all of this together, if you're currently in MSSP or REACH, your current performance and your current numbers, your expenditures, risk scores, and so on, may not be very indicative of how you will perform under LEAD. And projecting LEAD performance in general is going to be a challenge without nationwide data. Your performance is really measured versus the REACH, and you have your regional and national trend components. You have your regional efficiency that sets the low spending and the high spending status. And you can really only understand that if you know what the whole nation looks like. So far, CMS or CMMI hasn't really released any information on what the regional population looks like. The high needs split, like I was saying, MSSP and REACH reporting, we don't know what that high needs population is going to look like on average. And the changes in the attribution methodology from both MSSP and REACH could mean your attributed population behaves differently than the population that you're used to. In practice, what this means is if you want to set up these financial projections and understand what your performance is going to look like, you need a national data source, something like the 100% Medicare fee-for-service claims data, some nationwide data source that allows you to compare your projected beneficiaries against what the regional and national performance would look like. Milliman has access to this data. We've developed tools allowing projection of the ACO performance under LEAD. So with that,
Nathan, I just wanted to jump in. I really appreciated and wanted to emphasize what you said about the nuances of the high needs population being split out, and what that might, and the alignment methodology piece, being a little bit different, because I think as a non-actuary, non-finance person, I was really focused on benchmark setting and trending. And I was like, oh, it's really so much like MSSP, right? If you're an MSSP or you're an organization that's going to enter an MSSP agreement in 2027, the benchmark years are the same. Other than the ACPT guardrails, it looks really similar. And I was like, oh, that feels really different than what we saw when people were deciding between REACH and MSSP, where the benchmark years were different. The line, like it felt more different. And so I kind of in my head had summed it up as like, first 5 years are really like MSSP, but that high needs piece being split out, especially for organizations that, even if you're not 40% high needs, you still have that in your benchmark and your performance year. So I just wanted to call that out. I really appreciated your explanation there. And I think that's an important thing for people to be thinking about, and not doing what I did and sort of over indexing on like, it looks a lot like MSSP, some parts do, not everything though.
Right. That high needs component is going to be the trickiest one to understand, especially because they're recalibrating the REACH risk score model for the LEAD high needs population. So even with the REACH high needs segment, the LEAD segment could look very different with that recalibration.
Yeah, that really emphasizes your point about like you can't just rely on how you've done in REACH or how you've done in MSSP to understand how you might do here. Appreciate that.
Great. I think I'll take it from here. Thanks, Nathan. Next slide. So between now and the January 2027 go live, the months ahead are filled with a lot of the work we've been discussing. Finalizing your participation list, completing your financial modeling, resolving operational gaps, standing up care management infrastructure, and executing vendor contracts. None of those things happen overnight, and several of them probably have dependencies on others too, so it's important to prep now. And we're not trying to spook or scare people here. Really, I think what we're known for at Coral is to always tell our clients to prepare early and to get those operational processes in place. And so we're always here to forewarn and to raise risks. And we know that there's a lot here, but we're genuinely, Milliman and Coral are both committed to helping you navigate it. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, especially as it relates to timelines and as we're going through a little more operational planning. Next slide. So want to bring this all together with really 3 core takeaways, because we know that this was a lot of information and these models are no joke. So I think really the first takeaway we want to bring to the forefront is know your model design choices, because they have lasting financial consequences. Your risk track, capitation election, and participation list decisions all flow directly into your benchmark and ultimately your shared savings opportunities. Some of these choices are revisable and some are not, particularly for renewing ACOs and global risk. Make sure you run your scenarios before you lock anything in. Second is to build the right operational foundation before go live. Your infrastructure, care management staffing, compliance, and vendor readiness, these should all be assessed and addressed well ahead of January 1st, 2027. And the organizations that struggle, at least that we've seen at Go Live, are almost always the ones that underestimate how much lead time these operational work streams require and the amount of people and humans that they require too. Third, act now. May 17th is a low risk opportunity to really keep your options open. These are non-binding applications, and we can run your financial productions and just really do an honest assessment of your readiness. You can refine your decisions as CMS releases additional guidance, but and we know that they will be opening up. They plan to open up future cohorts, but CMS encourages folks to apply now if you know that you want to participate. Next slide. So really just want to thank you all so much for spending this time with us today. We appreciate your engagement, and we're rooting for all of you as you take this next step. We're happy to answer any questions. I know that we have maybe 15 minutes left here. Just like some resources on this slide deck and just some immediate next steps. Like I said in the chat, we will share these slides with you all via email, and I think that's it for me. But I will folks feel free to drop your questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute as well, that works. Andrew, can you bring down the slides?
While we're giving folks a chance to either put questions in the chat or raise your hand or come off mute to ask things, I'll kick it off here. Joy-Nathan, I'm curious, as you're talking with clients or just thinking about how you would approach this, certainly have heard from folks who are maybe been in reach and are used to the TIN and PI structure, and now it's a whole TIN structure. And you both touched on that, but curious if there's anything else you want to share from either perspective about how you're advising organizations on how to think about that, and maybe a little bit more about the potential implications of that and how folks should prepare.
Yeah, I can start, and then Nathan, feel free to add anything here. So, I mean, I think that for folks from MSSP, the whole TIN approach will be familiar, right? But for REACH, this is a little bit different, and I think that we talked a little bit about like how this affects attribution, and CMS still needs to release a lot of guidance related to like operationally how this will all work. But something to think about, and we talked during our presentation about capitation and ultimately like what are some implications there, and something that folks will learn as you participate in the model are the fee-for-service reductions. And a lot of that can get pretty complex for providers and for your participant TINs. And operationally, that's all something that which CMS will likely issue some deadlines around when you need to get attestations and signatures, right? But operationally, your providers under your TINs will need to attest that they are okay with fee-for-service reductions, how much those will be. And so even just in your own written arrangements with your TINs and making sure that your providers understand what it really means to be in this model is going to be important. So just because it operates on a whole TIN level, that doesn't mean that ACOs should just forego talking to those providers underneath and making sure that they understand the implications of being in this model, especially with capitation and fee-for-service reductions being included here.
So a number of the ACOs that I'm speaking to, especially the ones coming from REACH, from a financial perspective, being able to carve out certain NPIs who maybe weren't performing well under the particular model was a real benefit to the ACO as a whole. Losing that ability has triggered some ACOs to consider, well, maybe I can change my TIN's billing practices, have, say, specialists who I don't expect to perform well billed to a separate TIN so that they're no longer influencing the performance of the whole ACO. That's a strategy that I've heard some ACOs discuss. All that being said, the high needs population throws a wrench in things. It used to be pretty clear patients attributed via specialists usually did not perform as well on a risk-adjusted basis as patients attributed from primary care specialists. That may not be the case anymore with the high needs population. You may have more opportunity for your specialists to perform well, maybe even less opportunity for the PCPs to perform well. We'll need to see more data, more information on performance, but it is an interesting new dynamic.
Great. Michelle, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, hi. Michelle Markovich from Southwestern Health Resources. Hi, Joy. I think we've spoken many times before when you were with CMI. Thank you for this presentation. It's really helpful. My question is around, you were mentioning maybe an attestation or something related to the fee reduction agreement. We are a REACH ACO, so for REACH, there was a CMS fee reduction agreement that we had to sign every single year without fail, which is cumbersome because most of our agreements are evergreen. And so wondering, I've asked this question to CMS multiple times and I haven't gotten an answer as far as will we get a fee reduction agreement before we need to start contracting, which is next week, or is it going to be a different process for lead? Thank
No,
you.
it's a great question. And my rule of thumb is that if the help desk has not answered your question yet, even after multiple follow-ups, that means that they don't know the answer to that question. And I say that as someone on the other side where we definitely did not answer ones that we didn't know. But no, it's a great question, Michelle. And I think that right now they haven't yet announced any of their, specifications or operational guidance. It wouldn't surprise me if one, I do think that they're going to have as many templates as possible in order to try to help ACOs, not have to draft anything from scratch. But I wouldn't be surprised if they required, formal attestations from providers each year, just to make sure, just because that fee for service reduction is pretty significant for one, for providers, but two, also just generally being able to make sure that there's an agreement in place and that they know that this is happening, because we've seen help desk questions before where you'll have providers coming in saying I've had it reduced, but I didn't sign anything, or people saying, hey, I did this, but I didn't receive any payments from my ACOs. And oftentimes, right, if not all the times, the CMS can't do much since the contract arrangement is between the ACO and the provider TINs. But yeah, unfortunately, Michelle, I wish I could give you more guidance on timelines, but I think that that's something that we're looking out for as well.
Absolutely. And I do know about those emails to the help desk because we have agreements with the physician executive. They forget to tell their biller. So the billers are calling the help desk. But thank you very much. Appreciate you guys.
And that's a great tip, Michelle. Make sure you tell your billers. So
It really is though, because I think that we don't know exactly what CMMI will require in terms of the contracts, but I think it's safe to say that what CMS wants to avoid is providers being surprised that their billing is being reduced. And so to your point, Michelle, that can be the clinician, but often it's the billers or the revenue cycle folks. So definitely important to make sure that the right people within your organization know what to expect when it comes to fee reductions and capitation. I see a comment in the chat here asking, is there uncertainty around whether a new lead entity can achieve the 40% high needs threshold to have lower alignment minimums? In other words, new entity won't know for certain whether it hits the 40%, and that has implications for eligibility if they don't have enough lives. So Joy or Nathan, anything you want to provide in response to that question?
So in the RFA, it's spelled out that there's a 2-time buffer on alignment, where either if you're within, I believe, 10% of the minimum alignment necessary, or if you're within 10% of the threshold to hit that 40%. So essentially you've got 30% that are high needs or USRD. You can use a buffer twice to effectively waive those requirements. You're close enough and they'll let you participate. If you need to use it more than twice, or if you need to use it in 2 consecutive years, then they'll terminate you from the model according to the RFA. So to one extent, I don't think you'll know until they actually give you your alignment. But you do have a buffer in case you're below it to change your strategy for future performance years.
I'll also add, right, there is obviously the uncertainty because CMS does designate you, and I think if you work with actuarial firms, they'll, like Milliman, they will run your analysis to say, yes, you likely will meet your 40%. It's also worth noting that the high needs criteria has expanded. And so there's that Kim's Frailty edition now that, in a sense, which should make it more inclusive for more populations to be identified as a high needs, a high needs beneficiary, and so I think that it likely will lower the bar a little bit of what it means to be high needs, and really that's intentional too. I think that there's been a lot of advocacy from stakeholders over the years about what it really means to be a high needs beneficiary, and so hopefully while there's still uncertainty all around, just folks won't know until they add their participant TINs after August 5th. If folks are talking to firms and really have a good set pulse on their patient demographic and the makeup, then it shouldn't be too much of a surprise whether you meet that threshold or not, and to be able to be eligible for those lower alignment minimums.
Other questions? Joy, Nathan, any last words of wisdom you'd like to share then before we wrap up?
I think, we are, May 17th will come sooner than you all expect. And I know that
or not soon enough, depending on how deep.
Maybe not soon enough. Yeah, depending on where you're coming from here. Or maybe folks are actually counting down for that. But no, I mean, I think that want to make sure that if you have concerns or want to even think about, right, post May 17th, that, right now you're like, I'm heads down in my application. I can't even think about operations. That come May 17th, if that is something that you all can shift your mindset to, that Coral and Milliman are here to help.
The one thing I was going to say again around May 17th is you can keep your options open, right? So nothing's binding at May 17th. You can choose some of these change some of the parameters later on. You can withdraw your application. So, it's good to have a general sense by May 17th, but even beyond that, it's still worthwhile to dig into what your performance might look like.
Absolutely, especially as CMS releases detailed financial specifications later in the summer. I know, Nathan, you and Team Milliman have been working hard to take everything from the RFA and turn it into modeling, but there's always going to be assumptions you have to make there without the final specs. So I would anticipate if I'm running an ACO today, I want to do some preliminary modeling, and then I want to do some updated modeling once those specs are out. So it's an ongoing, certainly, decision-making process and preparation process there. All right. Well, Joy, Nathan, thank you guys so much. Thanks everyone for joining. There's a lot to unpack in Lead. Our goal here was not to tell you everything there is to know about it, but hopefully you got one or two, tidbits or nuggets that help you think about what's next. And please feel free to reach out if there's ways we can support you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.